everyone, and welcome back to our functions lessons again. And in this lesson we will look at the introduction to the hyperbolic function. Now the hyperbola in grade 10 is of the form y equals ax plus q. Now please look, the variable x is the denominator here, and sometimes they try and catch you out by writing y equals a times x to the power of negative 1 plus q. Now that which is written here is exactly the same as that, because we can take the x to the power of negative 1, take that base with its exponent out, put it below the a here, and then we have the same that is written over there, right? Okay, so please don't make that mistake. This is exactly the same as that, so rewrite this equation so that it looks like that one. Now let's go and look at what does the values of a and q actually mean. Now a tells us in which two quadrants the hyperbola is. Now if a is a positive, then it is in the quadrant 1 and 3. So it is in the two positive quadrants, because there's my y is positive, my x is positive, so that entire quadrant is positive. In this one, x is negative, y is negative, and two negatives gives us a positive. So these are my two positive quadrants. So if a is a positive number, the hyperbola will be in quadrant 1 and in quadrant 3. Now if a is negative, then it is in quadrant 2 and 4. Because these two quadrants are my negative quadrants, because x is negative, y is positive, negative and a positive is negative. And here we've got a positive x, negative y, and a positive and a negative is a negative. So these two are my two negative quadrants. Now, what is the q? Q is the horizontal asymptote. Now, please know this, that in the parabola, the plus q was my y-intercept. In a linear equation, the plus c is my y-intercept. But with a hyperbola, the plus q is not a y-intercept. It's actually an asymptote. Now, what is an asymptote? Well, there are two asymptotes, but for grade 10, you need to note only the one. Now, an asymptote is an imaginary line which the function cannot cross. Okay, so asymptotes are imaginary lines which the function cannot cross. Now, if we look at this function quickly, our first horizontal asymptote will be right here on the x-axis for this one, and I'll talk about this a little bit later. So the asymptote is right here on the x-axis, and that means this parabola will never cross the x-axis. The other one is the vertical asymptote, which you don't really need to know about in grade 10, because we don't move our hyperbola left or right. So what you can remember is that a hyperbola has two asymptotes, one vertical asymptote and one horizontal asymptote. Now the horizontal one is like a horizontal linear line, right? And when we have a horizontal linear line, we always say y equals the place where it goes through the y-axis. So this asymptote is called y equals 0, and the vertical one for a vertical linear line, you remember this from our linear equations, it's always where that vertical line goes through my x-axis, so this one will be x equals 0. Now, we will look at that a little bit later on, but let's just continue here. So, we know now that A tells us in which quadrant the hyperbola will be, and the Q tells us where the asymptote will be. Okay, so let's have a look. Now, here's the first example. Y equals 3 divided by x. This is a hyperbola because the x is the denominator. Now, 3 is positive, so that is why my hyperbola is in the two positive quadrants. Okay, great. Now, let's have a look at this one. What is my plus q if I do that also in red? Now, my plus q is a plus 0. So that is why my asymptote is right here on my x-axis. Because here we say y equals 0, and y equals 0 for a linear line is where the linear line is horizontal and it goes through my y-axis at 0. So basically, if I can quickly draw in a line here, I can draw this, and we always use this dotted line to show where our asymptote is. So our asymptote is a line that is drawn like that. Okay, and the hyperbola will never cross that line. Now let's look at the blue one. So first of all, I'm just gonna put in that blue one normally. Okay, so that is what it looks like if it's y equals 3 divided by x. Y equals 3 divided by x, but now it moves up 2 places. So let me see what happens. The asymptote is now at +2 on my y-axis. So look, it moves up 2 places, and there we go. Can you see the asymptote is now at 2 and the entire hyperbola moved up? And can you see now that it moved up, we are going to have a x-intercept, and that's what we will look at when we are going to draw an hyperbola, how to calculate it. But for you in grade 10, look very closely. My other asymptote, my vertical one, this one doesn't change because we never move it left or right. The hyperbola will never cross my y-axis, so you will never actually have a y-intercept. And now let's have a look at the purple one, and I'm going to leave the blue one there, and then we'll see what happens with the purple one. So if I put in the normal function, that is what it was normally, the y equals 3 divided by x, y equals 3 divided by x, but now -1. So it moves 1 place down. My asymptote is at -1. So let's quickly see if I move this down 1 place, and there we go. Can you see my asymptote passes through -1 on my y-axis? And that is where it will be now. So let me remove this blue one quickly, and then I'll show you again. So that's what the normal function looked like, and now we move it 1 place down, and now it will be over there. Can you see for this purple one? And because it moved down, we have an x-intercept, which is now right on that x-axis, but now my asymptote moved 1 down because it moved 1 down here with the function. Okay, great. So let's put this one away then, and then we look at the last one. Y equals -3 divided by x plus 2. Well, a is a negative value, so it's not in the 2 positive quadrants. It's now in the 2 negative quadrants. So let's have a look. So if it was like this, it won't be like that now. Why not? Because that is negative. These two are in the positive quadrants. So what basically is going to happen, it should look like this now. Okay, so forget about the 2 red ones. We look at the black one, and now look very closely. That is what it should look like, but my asymptote is still at +2, so it moves up 2 places, and that is where it will be. Okay, so please remember, we're going to do the same as with all the functions. Plot in the +2, because that's just the asymptote. So you draw in your asymptote, and what is the name of this asymptote? Because it is a horizontal line, we will call it y equals 2 in this case, right? Because it goes through 2, that's what they say. And now we know it's negative, so we have the hyperbola in the 2 negative quadrants. Okay, so look where it was originally, and because it moved up 2 places, we are going to have an x-intercept too. Okay, and we will look at how we draw it in the next lesson, but I just want you to understand what the values of A and Q actually means. See you again soon. Keep practicing. Bye. This is your host Richard T, and thank you for joining us. Please visit our website mathsa.co.za for free guided exam tutorials.